So I played the USAT East tournament this weekend, and it was a lot of fun. Really had a great time, met a lot of very interesting people, played a lot of good games. But one thing was kind of bugging me. I got totally annihilated by this opening I'd never seen before. So afterwards, I went back to my hotel room, and I just thought about what to play differently. So it's in the Queen's Gambit accepted. White plays e4, black plays b5. White plays a4, c6, and white can also play knight c3. That's fine. b4, knight b1, to go knight d2, but I feel like this is not really that challenging for black. For example, e5. I think black is doing fine here. So I took on b5, he took back, and I was expecting to go knight c3, a6, and knight b5. When, I wasn't really sure of the theory exactly, but I knew white was supposed to be slightly better, and I felt like I could figure this out. So I was kind of surprised when he pulled out queen b6 here. My first instinct was to punish it with knight d5. Right, we want to play knight c7 check. That's totally logical. Queen b7, bishop f4, wanted to play knight c7. And black actually, this line is actually totally sound for black. This is actually very good for black, or at least equal. After e5, bishop e5, knight d7, bishop f4, knight f6, white should play knight c7 check. In the game, I took on f6 and played f3. My opponent played in great style with sacrificing on d5, and I got crushed. But instead, we can play knight c7 check. And after king d8, the main line is knight a8, taking on e4, knight e2, protecting the bishop, queen a8. And white has a couple of moves here. For example, f3, knight d5, bishop d2, bishop d6, knight g3. This is what they do. Like, that's the chessable course that gives this line. And black seems to be doing totally fine here, putting white under some pressure. What do we play against this line? It just seems super good. There's actually an interesting move here that I noted that it's never been played in the master database, and very rare, is to actually play f3 here. And black has to actually find the move g5 in this position. So we take on a8, they take on g5, queen d2 hits the f4 pawn, queen a8, queen f5 check, king e8, queen b5, a4. And this is kind of interesting ending, where again, black kind of has to find rook g8. I guess it's not really clear what else they should do, but knight f3. And black has a ton of moves here, but just cover rook g2. White can take on c4 with the queen. And again, black has a bunch of options. If knight b6, we can check and then go queen e5 and reach this ending, which is pretty interesting. It's kind of complicated, but it's equal. Maybe black's applying a little bit of pressure. It's maybe a little dangerous for white, but I think it's a pretty interesting position to play. So that's my first suggestion here, is to play f3. Because, for example, if bishop b4 check, white actually gets a slight edge after king f2, knight h5, knight d5, for example, to hit the bishop, knight f4, knight b4, a5, knight c2, f5, and the line continues. I doesn't recommend checking this out on your own, but I think if black's going to play this, they're going to have some good preparation, but they might have skipped f3 if they were just following the chessable course. But as a whole, I think this with knight d5 gives black exactly what they want. So there's a few other things that are kind of rare, and then finally, I'd like to recommend this move b3, which I think gives white a pretty straightforward position to play. So for the first funny move is knight h3, which is also a novelty. Which is kind of funny. Basically, the point is that white wants to play f3, well, they probably want to play f3, so the knight can't go there, and we also want to play bishop e2 and knight e2. So the knight is kind of misplaced, like both the pieces want to be on the e2 square, because we don't have d3. So we just developed the knight, black plays e6 to develop the bishop, bishop e2, bishop e4, knight e7, knight e2, and, I don't think you have to go too deep here, because black's not going to be expecting this. But I think this is an interesting position to play. So I just want to switch to knight e3. Again, you can also play it here, knight h3 in this position. But the main move I would like to play, if I ever play this again, would be the move b3. It's very natural. We're just going to try to break apart the black pawns. They have several options. None of them are really good. They should play e6. Simply take on b5 and take on b3. And white's doing great. There's no problems here. Take d4, bishop e3, knight f3. I don't think the other moves are really challenging at all for white. We're attacking these pawns. Black has to act very quickly. So he plays e3, wanting to play bishop b4. We take the c pawn, he plays bishop b4, bishop c2 to defend that. And again, it would seem like he has quite a few options, but like bishop c3 is really lame. Like, who in the right mind thinks that black's doing okay here? For example, we have this move, which is very good for white. As soon as the bishop leaves, you can play queen g4. That's a pretty common theme. Queen d4. Is the pawn hanging? No, white gets a lot of initiative. Queen b6, knight b5. Bishop d2, queen d2, knight f6, knight d6. And we see that white has a huge initiative. Black should just take on c4. We take back with the bishop. Again, it's the same sort of questions. Although here queen d4 loses a lot more directly to queen a4 check, now that the b5 pawn's gone. If knight f6, we play e5. They should take on c3. I'm going to go into this position where white's slightly better. Instead, if they retreat, again we move the knight, they take on d2, and now we can try to attack the king side. For example, knight g5, h4, and this is always good for white because we always can play this, and knight d6, covering f7, and black's king is in a lot of trouble. So for example, queen e7, queen c2 threatens mate, f5 stops that, knight d6, and the engine wants black to bail out with knight f6 here. But if they take on g5, we just take back, and a queen g5, rook a3 is very strong. And if rook d8, like what else should black really do? Maybe they want to play knight f8. Queen c7, stopping the knight from moving, and then we can play rook a3 next move. So here black should try to finish development and castle kingside with knight e7. And again, white has several moves to choose from. I felt the most natural move was knight g2. Black's gonna castle. We're gonna castle. They play e5. Knight a4 hits the queen. And again, black has a bunch of moves, but I like this position for white. I think it's something you could play. It's not going to win on the spot, but it's much better than what I did in the game. And it is like a real chess position where you actually have to use your skills, and it's not just like some crazy tactical preparation thing, like after knight d5, which, I mean, what's even happening in that position? So queen c6, and the chessable course, what's really good about when your opponent follows the chessable course is you can always just find places to deviate that they haven't covered in the course. So the course only covers, this line after d5, and I'll just show the line. Knight b6, this is all actually very interesting. Not queen b5. Queen a6, taking b4, hits the knight as well. d6, and it gives this line as equal for black. So instead of that, white can just play very naturally with bishop d3. There's other moves as well, which all lead to the endgames. So black should try to simplify the position with bishop a6. Rook c1 hits the queen. Queen e8. Knight b6 hits the rook. Rook a7. Bishop e3. Knight d7. Knight a5. Rook a8. Knight f4. h6 and h3. Which I think is a very interesting middle game, which either player could win. And I think it kind of is one of white's best tries against the queen b6 line, which is very dangerous and objectively very good.